Today's date is January 22nd, 2015. I'm interviewing Tommy Pike and Glenda Pike. And this is part of Missouri State University's Route 66 Oral History Project, which is funded by the National Park Service. So without further ado, Mr. Pike, I want to ask you about how you and Glenda and people in Missouri started the Route 66 Association for our state.
Well, I first heard of there was interest in doing it in like September of 1989. And well, I'd been interested in Route 66, grew up within a half a block of it. So I'd always been interested in 66, and not really from the standpoint of the TV show. And a fellow by the name of Tom Snyder put an ad in Hemmings Motor News wanting to know if there was anybody interested in buying Route 66 maps. And I wrote him a letter, and that was like in 83 or 4. And he sent me back a letter stating he hadn't developed the maps, he just wondered if there was any interest in it. And so I never heard from him. And in 89, I heard that there was interest in starting a state association. And I was at the first meeting, or we were, at Stoss's truck stop at Mount Vernon, was where the first meeting was held. And at that meeting, it was determined that we would meet at Tri-County Truck Stop, which originally was the Diamonds. And
Outside of St. Louis?
Yeah, about a month later, 3 weeks. And it was determined that there was enough interest to start one. And we went to both meetings, and then we held another meeting, and these were conducted by Thelma White at Halltown and a fellow by the name of James Powell, who worked for Ralston Purina in St. Louis. And we decided we'd have another meeting, I don't know, within a week or two after the one at Tri-County, and they appointed a board, and then we elected officers. And I was on one of the members of the first board. Jim Powell was the first president. And I believe a fellow by the name of Bob Capps out of Carthage was vice. And I can't tell you who secretary and treasurer was. I believe Freeman McCullah was treasurer. Anyway, we formed then, and we got our charter in January of 90. And we were started, and we held a meeting, up in the St. James area, and kind of got things started real good, and there were several people there. And we decided that we would have quarterly meetings, and in between those quarterly meetings we'd have board meetings. And that was kind of how we got started. And in January, after we had our charter, we discussed what we needed to do to get it recognized through the state. And so Jim Powell said, well, we need to get started and wait a year. And I told him, I said, I don't think that's what we ought to do. So I contacted my state congressman, J. Woodall, told him, and I said, what would you suggest? I said, we'd like to in a year get a bill passed where it's made a historic route through the state of Missouri. He said, why wait a year? And I said, well, Jim Powell thinks we should wait a year and get going. And he said, no, let's do it now. And J.Dan Woodall and Tom Mitchell up in Waynesville area was a congressman in that area. Both introduced a bill at the same time, and what was his name? He's out of Lebanon, was a senator that supported it in the Senate side. And anyway, they put it through, or introduced it, and Woodall said, we'll introduce the bill this year and get it made a historic route, but we won't ask for any money for anything. We'll just make it a historic route. And so that's what they did. And I told him, I said, you need to call Jim Powell, talk to him, tell him he needs to do it right now. And so they did, and it passed both houses with no dissenting votes.
What was the effect of that legislation
Well,
for the Mother Road?
well, it made it a historic route through the state of Missouri, the first state to do that.
What does that mean?
Well, it was a historic route. It was recognized as such. And Woodall and Mitchell's idea was that after it was a historic route, then they could go back and ask for funding for whatever we wanted. Well, between that time and July the 3rd of '91, the association raised the money to pay for the signs, pay MoDOT for them. And what it amounted to, well, the treasurer was Freeman McCullah, who was a district engineer with MoDOT, and they reached an agreement with MoDOT for the signs. And the association would pay $76 or $77 a piece for the signs on MoDOT right away, which would be for perpetuity. And then the off-system signs like St. Louis Street and College and the communities that it wasn't a state road, the signs were, I think, $18 a piece. And so we contacted the communities, and MoDOT and the association figured out how many signs they thought they needed on and off system. And so we went to the communities and asked them if they wanted to buy signs at $18, but if they put them up and come back down, they'd have to buy another one. They wouldn't refurnish the signs at $18. That was cost.
Mm-hmm.
And
Tommy, excuse me, let me ask Glenda a little bit about, if you could add anything to the founding of the association.
What Tommy said about Tom Snyder. Tom Snyder was a really gun-ho person on Route 66, and we had collected newspaper clippings and different memorabilia from the time we got married in 1962 until this time on Route 66. And some friends of ours, we were just out piddling around on a Sunday afternoon, and we happened to stop at Whitehall Mercantile in Halltown. And Thelma White, who owned it, she had a petition that Jim Powell from St. Louis had given her just to have people sign if they were interested in so that's how we made the connection.
Interested in preserving
Route
the historic
66.
route.
And that's how we got connected with Jim Powell in St. Louis.
Wow.
Was through Thelma at Halltown.
I think I've seen some pictures of her store. It's quite a colorful.
Yes, there's an oral history here too at MSU with them, with her and her husband, and so that just led to the. And I'm not real sure that Tommy is correct about saying Freeman McCullah was treasurer. There was another man that was the lawyer, Tommy.
Oh, yeah, out of St. Louis.
Yeah, out of St. Louis, and I cannot remember his name.
Well, there's records I think we could probably find to
Well,
answer things like that.
But it all happened real fast that first year, that, you know, everything just fell into place, you know, because of J. Dan Woodall here in Springfield. He was on a tourism committee. He happened to be on a state tourism committee, which didn't hinder things any. He was real enthused about it. And he knew my family, and he knew that we were legitimate in what we were wanting to do. And he really helped a lot.
What do you think the main success of the association has been? You know, it's been almost 25 years now.
Well, we celebrated our 25th anniversary last fall on our motor tour.
Right.
We had a 25th anniversary cake and stuff. But I think most of it is just awareness to. I like to think it's awareness to the businesses and the icons along the route that someone is interested in preserving that part of the highway. Some of it is kind of pushed aside by 44 and the other traffic, and these people know that there's somebody behind them. A good example is all the phone calls and emails we've gotten over this bridge at the Gasconade Bridge that has been closed. You know, they think that the association can help, and I hope we are helping. But we've replaced the brown signs with the byway signs. We got byway status, which eventually, if the federal level opens up for new national byways, we'll be able to apply for federal byway status. That was our purpose of the corridor management plan. You have to have that in place before you can apply. And we had 100 copies, hard copies of that 2-volume corridor management plan, and we've delivered. We don't have very many copies in storage, but we delivered them to communities and libraries along Route 66 in Missouri, and it has a lot of helpful things in it, and we hope it has helped communities and cities. We hope that they have used it.
And this all will result in more tourism and more appreciation for the historic nature.
The idea.
That's going to really benefit people. It'll create jobs.
Eventually, it was hoped that all 8 states could be a state byway, and then a national byway, and then have it all be an American road, all American road. Texas does not have a byway plan. They have a trail plan, and it's kind of gotten bogged down. But that was the general idea, that eventually the whole route would be a national byway.
That's great. Well, let me ask Tommy, what do you feel the main successes of your association have been?
Well, probably with causing awareness of Route 66 across the state. As you go up and down through the state, there are cities that are pro 66, and there's some that could care less. I mean, there were a lot of communities that when the interstate system come through, they got bypassed and they died. To be truthful, Springfield has been a hard sell until just the past couple of years. They haven't really been interested. And now they've started the College Street and the festival and such as that, and there's an awareness here and there's an interest. But me and Skip Curtis, I had the fellow that was over the Route 66 program, Michael Taylor, in here to talk to the city a couple of times, you know, trying to build some interest.
Almost 20 years ago.
And it just didn't take hold. And then Skip passed away, and I hate it that he's not around to see what's being done now. But
He was an advertising man, wasn't he? And he wrote the Route 66 tour book.
yeah,
And that
he
was an
wrote
early
Route 66
publication.
Yeah, that was one of his earlier ones. And then he wrote the Birthplace of Route 66, which was here in Springfield. And it's just been slow to take hold. Probably for a long time, the most progressive city was Cuba.
Yeah, they have those wonderful murals.
And everything, and they got with the program, you know. But Springfield had the advantage when 66 left St. Louis Street and College and Kearney more or less. The businesses just moved to the interstate. Well, some of these communities, they moved it far enough they couldn't move to the interstate. I mean, it just wasn't feasible for them to do it. So there was communities that virtually went out of existence. So when it came back, they were interested in using 66 to get people to come to their community again.
Mm-hmm.
And it's helped some communities quite a bit. And it's helped all of them some of them just don't see it. I mean,
Right.
when the foreign tourists go through, they look like us and they just think there's somebody else going down the road. They don't associate it with being tourism dollars coming through there when they stop and eat or buy something that escapes them.
Tommy, let's go back in history now. I want to ask you a little bit about your biography growing up here in Springfield, and then about your knowledge of the African American community around the Route 66 area. Where were you born? What
I was
date?
born here in Springfield, August 30th, 42.
Okay.
My grandmother, I lived a half a block off of 66, and my grandmother lived on Weller and East 24th Street, and there was a strip of ground between Kearney and East 24th. And until they put Kearney Street through, she was on the east-west corridor right there. In fact, my dad and his two brothers and sister grew up there.
What street did you grow up on?
Pickwick.
Up by 24th Street?
Yeah, and well, my whole life, when you come out, you would go to Fremont and get on Kearney, or you'd go up to Delaware and get on Kearney Street. And my folks never referred to it as 66. It was always, well, if you get down there by the highway, be careful. I mean, it was the highway.
Right.
And, well, I had to cross, first 5 years of school, I had to cross Kearney Street to go to school. And it was Route 66, and traffic was tremendous on it. And every morning and every afternoon in the fall and spring, there would be a motorcycle policeman there to stop traffic for the crosswalk.
That's great.
And
Well,
then
tell me a little bit
winter,
about your
police
family.
car.
What kind of work did your parents do, and how many siblings did you have?
I don't have any brothers and sisters.
So you were an only child.
Yeah.
And how about your parents? Did they work in the
My
area?
dad was Springfield Wholesale Grocery Company. He was superintendent.
Mm-hmm.
And my folks got married in 33, and he went to work there in January of 34, and he worked for him until the day he died.
That's really
I mean, he's
unusual.
retired, but his retirement was they sent him a paycheck every 2 weeks, just like he was a regular employee.
That's great. So he had a lot of feeling for Springfield.
Oh, yeah.
Had your family been here for several generations before?
Well, quite a bit. Now, my dad and his older brother were born on National, about halfway between Commercial and Kearney, where Kearney Street is now. And I'm not sure where I guess his sister was too, because she wasn't too much younger than him. And then they moved out to Pleasant Hope, and they lived there till I think he was 10 years old, and they moved back to Springfield. And they had a farm, or my grandmother did, out by Pleasant Hope. I mean, I remember the farm and going out there. They just moved back to town. She wasn't gonna raise her kids out in the country.
Is there anything about Springfield history other than Route 66 that has a personal connection to you and growing up here? Like the Civil War or the Depression, do you remember?
I'm interested in Springfield history. I'm a Springfield collector.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I collect Springfield items, and then from that, before the 66 interest, one day I happened to realize, well, I had a whole bunch of postcards that was Route 66. So I thought, and we'd been collecting stuff, and I thought, well, I kind of missed the postcards. So it got to the point that I was making two collections. Springfield postcards that were Springfield other than 66, and then I had the 66 postcard. And I don't know how many.
So has Route 66 become your collecting interest? Is that really your focus now? Or do you still look for Springfield?
Yes, I called a guy the night before last about a sign that a friend of mine told me about at Ozark, and I called, and he didn't want to sell it just yet, but I was telling him about the sign. He said, well, you're the guy that ought to have this when I get ready to get rid of it. And I said, well, just call me.
Have you got a personal museum at home?
No, I got personal boxes at home.
Well,
that is why when I was involved with the Park Service, that I tried to convince them that they needed to build a Route 66 museum in Springfield,
mm-hmm.
and needed to have 8 areas in it, one for each state, and that it would have a library where David Dunaway could bring his oral history and history collection and have it here. And I was asked why I thought the Park Service ought to have it, and I said because they know how to archive stuff. They don't thumbtack it on the wall somewhere where the sun shines in on it. I mean, they have the expertise. I'm not saying that all museums don't do it right, but I'm just saying some in the end, they've good intentions, but they don't know what they're doing exactly.
Let's ask Glenda a little bit about her family background. Are you as much a collector as your husband?
Probably more so.
Did you grow up here in Springfield? Tell us a little bit about your family.
I grew up here in Springfield. I was born at the Old Baptist Hospital over on, I think it's Market, or what was Market Street, in 1943. I have two brothers and a sister. I'm the oldest of the 4 children, and my older brother passed away a couple of years ago, and he was good about cutting things out about Route 66 wherever he lived and sending them to us. And my mother always lived in Springfield. My dad grew up in Webster County, and they met at Boulevard Baptist Church, and my grandmother said my mother had to finish school before she could get married. Daddy was 7 years older than she was, and so my mother was 16 and she graduated on one day, and they got married the next night. My dad's uncle married them, at Marionville, and they stopped at A&W Rootbeer was their wedding supper. And then they stayed all night at my grandparents' house, the first night they were married. But my dad, after he came home from World War II, he worked for Mary and Hilary Brightwell, who owned Resthaven Motor Court and Phillips 66 station. And so he worked on 66, and
How long did he work there? Several years?
several years. His mom and dad, my memories, my grandma and granddad King, his mom and dad lived at Marshfield. We traveled 66 back and forth all the time.
Going to Marshfield.
Going to Marshfield to see them. But I worked for Mary and Hilary Brightwell there at the motel. When I was, like we were trying to think last night, I must have been about 12 or 13 when I first started, and I pulled weeds and picked strawberries and run back and forth from the station to the cabins. And,
Excuse me, where was the motel?
It's there just east of Glenstone and Kearney.
Okay.
It's still there now.
Yeah.
Across from O'Reilly Auto Parts there at the
Oh.
end of Northtown Mall.
Is it still a motel?
It's still a motel.
Wow.
Mary and Hilary are both gone. They're both dead, but and their older son is not here anymore either. They have a younger daughter, and I still see her once in a while. And but when my dad first started working for them, and I wasn't very old, and Mary used to keep me once in a while and babysit with me, and we were real close with them. And then, I made spending money. I can't remember. I guess they, just gave it to me. I don't remember having a Social Security card or anything then. But
Did you work there through high school?
no, not all of high school. No, just I was probably in junior high. I wasn't very old, and Mary asked me one time to help one of the women that was cleaning the rooms, and she said, "You can collect the bath mats, and because they're dirty, they all need to be cleaned." So I collected all the bath mats out of the bathrooms, put them in one bathtub, put some stuff in them, and she come running down there. She was mad. Oh, she was mad at me because whatever I put in them was dissolving them. She had to pour a bunch of vinegar in the bathtub to stop it. I was cleaning them, but I didn't have to clean rooms any after that.
Where did you meet your husband? Can you tell us a little bit about your romance?
Well, my mother's name was Potter, and Tommy came to the family reunion with one of his neighbors, and that's how I met him.
Were you in high school?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. And how long did you know Tommy before you got married?
2 years.
Oh, let me see. That would have been at 58 because I could drive.
Tommy had a 1936 Plymouth Coupe, and
No, I still have
well, he
a
still has it.
1936
He still has it. And I hated that car when I first met him. I just thought it was terrible. And so we kind of didn't see each other then for a little while, and then he kept coming to the reunions. And so then we got back together again, and now then, the car is one of our prized possessions. So.
I went to reunion for the food.
But that's, someone turned your head.
I guess.
Well, what do you remember about growing up, besides crossing Route 66 to go to school? What was Route 66's reputation in Springfield? How did it affect the city at that time in the
Well, it was
1940s?
main artery of commerce, I'd say, because it, well, Kearney Street, because that was actually 66. Then, if you see any pictures from Kearney, Glenstone to St. Louis, and St. Louis to College and on out west, was marked as a city or business route. And most of the truck traffic and everything would go Kearney Street and out across the West 66 bypass back to College Street, which is now Chestnut Street. But that's what brought the commerce and all into Springfield. And then, well, people that remember Springfield history, Springfield was a transportation hub. It had the railroad, it had several trucking companies here, 66 and 60 highway and 65 run through here. And it also had an airline. So this was a transportation center. And when I was in school, they'd always tell us, now if they bomb this country, we're a target. I mean, they didn't pull any bones about it. And they had, back then, they called it duck and cover in school. You're all too young to remember that, but they'd have like fire drills at school, and they would have bomb drills, and they rang the bell different. And depending on where you went, if it was a fire, you went outside. If it was a bomb drill, you went to the inside halls and steps and all. And if they'd have bombed this country with an atomic bomb, that was a waste of time. But
let's talk
feel
about
good.
Let's segue and talk a little bit about the African American community and Route 66. There must have been a lot of motels and cafes. What about were there many African Americans traveling the Mother Road?
You know, to be truthful, well, my first job was at Faye's Rootbeer stand. I was 15. I say real job because I had a Social Security card and I paid Social Security and state tax and federal tax, so that was a real job. And to be honest with you, I can't say that I remember there being any black people. I mean, of course, it was all curb service, and we had the girls would go out and wait on the cars. So I can't.
Was that on Kearney?
Yeah, corner of Kearney and Delaware,
right.
The northwest corner, and there's a car lot there now. But to tell you that I remember there being a lot of black people. To be truthful with you, well, when I started school, the blacks all went over here to Lincoln, which was Eastwood, which is the main building of OTC.
Right. Well, that area, we've learned from several interviews we've done as part of the project, that there was a center for the black community with churches and the Graham's Cafe and barbecue and hotel.
And one of Graham's cabins is still over here at the corner of Chestnut and Benton.
Right.
Back in there behind the buildings.
Did you ever go down there to the barbecue or that area?
Not really. Now my dad, being the grocery company and everything, they would deliver to them and such as that. And there were black kids around, you know, I mean, in the neighborhood, some, but I was in the 7th grade when they segregated, when they put them all together,
Mm-hmm.
and Lincoln become Eastwood,
Right.
and it become a junior high school. And the first black guy I went to school with they called him Duke Winkfield, and he went to Reed.
For grade school?
No, for junior high.
Oh, okay.
And he was the only one there.
How about, did you go to Central High School?
I went to Central. Now there were more there, but to be honest with you, it wasn't this deal we've got now.
In what sense?
Well, everybody went to school and they played sports, and they were on the teams together and everything, and there wasn't any of this burning the place down business.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody got along, and out here at Cave Springs, there were black people by the name of Pike.
Mm-hmm.
And my dad knew, and his dad knew all of them. Now, his dad died, I was only 3 years old. But if they were up there on Commercial Street or around the square, of course, that's where you went to shop. And if you saw them, my dad knew a lot of them, and he'd stop and talk to them.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know,
What percentage would you guess of your high school class at Central was African American?
I thought about that. There were several, but
Maybe only 5%.
yeah, I think it was more. They're just, I don't know, just wasn't.
Mm-hmm.
There were several, and you knew them. There's a lot of them. There's a guy I worked with at the railroad. He was a couple of years ahead of me. I was in classes with him there at Central and everything. And you just in class, nobody thought much about it. There was one kid, his name was James Davis, a black kid, and I was in several classes and sat next to him. He never said anything. If you asked him something, he'd talk, but most of the time he didn't say anything, He just, nice guy, he just didn't talk.
Glenda, let me ask you, what do you remember about the African American community when you were growing up?
To your question to Tommy about his class at Central, there's only about 3 that come to class reunions that are black. So I don't think there was 5% of the class.
Really?
That no.
What about your class? Were you also at Central?
I was at Central my freshman year of high school, and I just don't remember. I think the first time that I remember, hey, there's something separate here, was when there was this big controversy about if you were going to go swimming at Grant Beach Park and the blacks were there at the swimming pool, were you going to get in the water?
Mm-hmm.
That's terrible.
This would have been in the early 1960s?
No, in the 50s.
In the 50s.
50s.
Okay.
And that is the first time that I was aware that there was going to be some kind of problem with
Different races.
Yeah. And, I had a neighbor whose father was a big union guy, and he was so against it.
Against the integration?
Yes.
Uh-huh.
And I think that's what made it such a big deal for me to remember that particular thing as being the first time that I was really aware of what was going on.
Uh-huh.
And I don't think it made the water any different color or anything like that, It was still hot and everybody enjoyed the water.
Right. Well, when you were growing up, what do you remember of the African American community,
That's what
particular
I'm saying.
neighborhoods?
I don't remember very much because it was not a big deal.
There weren't black people living in the neighborhood where you grew up?
No, there was not any black people living where I grew up.
I gather there was one park that the blacks used quite a bit in Springfield. Was it Silver Springs?
Yes. And I didn't live real close to that.
Did you live near there at all?
No.
Did you
I
ever
lived
go out
north.
there?
I never went over there too much. I mean, we'd go to Grant Beach and Fast Night to watch the ball games, and that was about it. But now, there was one, her name was Mrs. Smith, and that's all I ever knew her as. She lived on Delaware, straight behind my grandmother, and down a little.
Mm-hmm.
And she had a son that was the same age as my dad or his younger brother. And my dad tell about, they go out to Valley Watermill swimming and stuff like that. And she lived there, and she owned a big piece of ground on the east side of Delaware, where the Hillcrest 90 apartments or whatever they are now. And I was plumb up in high school. Well, in fact, she died after we got married, and she would call down to our house if she needed something from the grocery store. Because, I mean, she probably wasn't as old as I am now, but it seemed like she was 100. And she'd walk to the bus and everything, but I'd go get her groceries. She'd call down there if she needed something. And I'd go to, at that time it was Poor Boys. When I was a little younger, it was Messerly's, but I'd go get groceries and take them up there to her. She lived there by herself, and her son had grown up and left Springfield. He'd come back occasionally.
What about
my dad would say, she'll offer to pay you, but don't you take a dime.
Mm-hmm. Let me ask you about the Graham's Barbecue and Hotel. Was that a popular place for young people to go at all?
Maybe the black kids, I'll say, but now there were whites that went there, but my folks never did. We went to Tindall's out there on Kearney Street, and when we got married, we'd in there. That was a black couple that owned property up and down Boonville Street. In fact, they owned the house next to my mother's folks.
Did they have a barbecue restaurant?
Yes, and it was a good barbecue, and we'd go in there and eat every Friday night after we got married, and
This was like 1962.
2, 3, 4 along in there.
Was I'm not clear where it is. Was it up by Kearney?
Yeah, it was on Kearney Street. The building's still there. It's east of Campbell Street and west of Robertson Street.
Mm-hmm.
And neither one of them was very big people. I mean, they
Just hardworking.
were hard workers. And
How long did that restaurant go?
Well, until 1965, because she got sick with cancer, and I mean, she didn't last 2 months, and he died in about 2 more months.
At first, it was just a little bitty,
Driveway.
right next to the shoulder of the road, because my dad would stop there. He'd work at night sometimes, and he'd stop there. You'd just drive up, and they'd just hand it to you to the car. And it wasn't really a drive-in restaurant thing, but they would.
They had their regular
curbside.
customers. Yeah.
And then, it was good barbecue. And they lived on Boonville Street, just 2 or 3 houses from Kearney Street.
Do you think they had much business from people traveling around 66?
Sure they
yes,
did.
Yes. I mean, it was constantly busy.
Parked along the edges.
That's one of my fondest memories is when we first were married is getting to eat barbecue there. Because we didn't have very much money and we didn't do a lot of stuff like that.
But you could have a good dinner there and it wouldn't set you back too much.
And
They were really nice people.
yeah, and we were in there one night and a black guy come in drunk. And like I say, she wasn't very big. And she jumped on him, ripped him up one side, down the other one.
Verbally.
Because he come in there drunk in front of her customers. And she told him, said, no wonder white people don't like black people. It's people like you. I mean, I remember that just as plain as if it was yesterday. And I mean, she threw him out.
Did she
said, now, when you sober up, come back and I'll give you a meal.
Did they have a good number of both black and white customers?
Yeah.
And what happened? You say it stopped about 1965?
Well, she got sick with cancer and passed away, and he died about 2 months later. I mean,
He just couldn't do it.
he just couldn't cope it with by himself. I mean, you know, they were real close, you could tell, and they lived in a house on the northwest corner of Boonville and Kearney Street. Big old 2.5-story bungalow house there. And I mean, everything was speaking
What was the name of the cafe?
Tindall's.
Tindall's. Were they any relation, you think, to the grain elevator?
I can't tell you like I say, him and her own property up and down Boonville were in that area to the south of Kearney, and my granddad owned houses on up closer to Atlantic, headed back to the north.
Do they still have family in the area, you
I
think?
don't know.
Yeah, the only person that I know that might know is
No, what they
Irv
interviewed,
Logan.
Irv or the Graham woman that they
Oh, up in
interviewed.
Iowa.
Yeah,
uh-huh.
I'm sure she knew him,
Uh-huh.
but you know,
Well, one of Irv's aunts might know too.
yeah.
Were there other businesses along Kearney that were owned by African Americans that might have had something to do with the highway that you remember?
Not that I really remember. Not really too much. And, you know, I guess there was, and you talk to some of them, they say, well, we couldn't this and we couldn't that. I don't remember any place that they couldn't go. I mean,
Springfield was sort of between the north and the south in attitudes, do you think? There wasn't a lot of discrimination here that you were aware of? People could go where they
well,
wanted
I don't
to.
know. I'll tell you, the first really I'll say that I realized that the blacks was, I won't say around, but they started coming to the front. What was the name of the group that sang on the Ozarks Jubilee? The
Philharmonics?
yeah.
Right.
They sang on the Jubilee, and they sang around, and I remember they used to, they'd have minstrel shows. Oh gee, you couldn't do that now if you even wanted to, but they'd have them at the Shrine Mosque.
And these would be white folks doing
dressed-
blackface.
But they would have some black entertainers come and sing.
Right.
And
Yeah.
now you probably couldn't get any to do that.
Right.
Now,
You have to be careful, you don't want to offend people.
well, yeah, I don't know. The politically correct has taken over, and I don't know, you know, won't say maybe that's wrong, but we've got to where some of the stuff that's not really, well, used to, everybody'd laugh about, funny was funny.
Right.
You know, don't mean dressing up as blacks or nothing, but I mean, people could accept it or whatever, and it seems like everybody now wants to wear their feelings out on their sleeve, and if something's said, they want to make more out of it than was meant by it or something like that. I don't know. It's
Let's go
just
back to
no
music.
toleration.
Right. People need to lighten up a little bit, maybe. What about, we've heard people talk about Bebop Brown. He had a music club on Kearney.
I guess I couldn't even tell you where it was.
He became a plumber as a day job, didn't he? Didn't he have,
May have. Now there.
did you ever know him?
I don't know. Now, I knew that played with him was Bobby Bedell. He was a drummer with him. He worked at the railroad.
And he was also, didn't he play in Chicago, or he had
may
a career
have. I don't
elsewhere
know.
as well
He-
as being here?
He
What's
worked.
the guy's name that comes to the reunion?
Well, the high school reunion?
That,
Bobby Brown.
yeah.
Bobby Brown, he was in the same grade I was, and played football and got a scholarship. And I can't remember whether he went to MU or where.
Uh-huh.
And he was good, and he's a big old boy, and I mean, huge. Or just, I mean, wasn't fat, he just big old stout guy, and I mean,
Did he play for Central?
yeah, and 3 or 4 of them could get on him, and he could just keep going, you know.
Is he still in Springfield?
No, he lives in New York City, and he came back, I went to reunion, they said, oh, Bobby's here. And so, you know, I was looking for this big guy, and one of the girls said, well, Bobby's sitting over there, and I looked and I said, nah, that's not him. He played pro, and they used him for a tackling dummy. I mean, they run over that old boy, and my cousin's husband played football with him. And we went over, he said something about Bobby Brown. I said, that little guy over there is Bobby Brown. He said, can't be. And I said, didn't we went over there? And he recognized us, and he said, my cousin's husband said, what happened to you? And he said, them big guys run over me, and he said, they about killed me. And I mean, he was all bent over and walking with a cane, and he was, they used him for a tackling dummy, I guess. I don't know, but he said, I said, they about killed me in the pros. And, I mean, he would just.
Do you have any acquaintances from the African American community?
Oh, yeah, I worked with a lot of them at the railroad.
Right. But I'm
Bobby
wondering if
Bedell and Tommy Bedell and Ernie Bedell, all the Bedells.
any of them have any connection with Route 66 in any way, or transportation?
Yeah, all Bobby and Ernie and Tommy and all of them worked at the railroad.
Mm-hmm. The Frisco.
Yeah, I knew Tommy he played drums in a band in high school and everything.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
How about Campbell 66? Did they have, were they integrated with their drivers?
I don't really know, to tell you the truth.
Was that the big trucking company here
Yeah,
in the day?
we did an oral history on, what was the guy's name? Primm?
He was one of the owners?
No, Frank Campbell owned it.
Mm-hmm.
There was nobody else, but he was one of the high vice presidents.
Uh-huh.
And me and Jerry went out and did an oral hit. Well, I talked to him at the truck show at the fairgrounds last year, and he gave a talk about Camel 66.
Uh-huh.
And I asked him if he would do one for the association. He said, oh yeah, I'd be glad to. And I told him, I said, now, well, I went to school with Frank Campbell's youngest daughter.
Mm-hmm.
And I told him, I said, now, if we ask something and you don't want to answer it, just say so. We're not digging for dirt. We just want to know. And his dad owned a trucking company in Joplin and sold out to Frank Campbell way back when. And that's how he got started in the trucking industry.
Did the Campbells have African Americans working there?
Well, I knew a lot of people worked there, but I can't tell you that I assume they did.
Yeah.
You just have to remember that there wasn't.
Springfield doesn't have that big a black
Uh-huh.
community.
Right. Well, I gather
And they stayed
to themselves.
to themselves.
They have their own churches and
Yes.
so forth.
Yes.
What do you think the effect of the famous lynching was here in Springfield that's still hanging on? Do you think people are aware of that, and do you think it's sort of cast a shadow over Springfield and race relations here?
Well, they say a lot of blacks left Springfield after that.
Right.
I'm going to be honest with you. I had never heard of that until I was grown and going to the Historical Society.
Right.
And who was the lawyer that came and talked?
Did he talk about that incident? That was 1906?
Yes.
Uh-huh. And what did he say about it?
Well, Moon. Parker Moon, I believe. And it was the old Parker Moon.
Mm-hmm.
And he came to the Historical Society and he said that was a trumped up deal.
In what sense?
He said that the white gal that they caught one or two of them with said that she consented to it. I mean, that guy got up in front of everybody at the Historical Society and just told you how it was, and he didn't pull any bones about it. And he said that was not right.
Right. Well,
and he told things about several cases, you know, that he is involved with. But this was the old man. I think he was 90 years old when he came and talked. And to be truthful with you, that's about the first time I'd heard of it, but not that much. And there's probably, I'm gonna say what, in the last 30 years there's been more said about it than there was prior to that time.
Yeah, I think people look back at that era as being a dark time in American history because there were a lot of lynchings in the South, but you know, we've gone past that, and it seems that not all, by any means, not all black people left Springfield. There's been a very active community here, and you yourself both know that there are people here who have had families for many generations, and it's a bigger community than just prejudice can destroy.
Well, here's my view, and I tell anybody want to go somewhere else. They say something about Springfield's in the South, and I said, no, we're not in the South. And we're not in the North. I said, the way it is here, black or white, we'll let you in. You know, the blacks we let in and all, but we just don't put up with any crap, is what it amounts to. I said, if you come in and you want to be a part and do your part, we don't care. Mm-hmm. But we're not going to, there's no freebies running around this part of the country too much. I mean, we expect everybody to carry their weight.
Right.
That's just kind of, I think, the attitude for this area. Mm-hmm. Just not Springfield, but there's a strip across this country that kind of adheres to that, I think.
Looks at a person for what they do and not their color or their religion or something.
Well,
you were going to add something, Glenda?
Well, I was just going to say, we've had, we have antique cars, and we had a black lady that wanted to join our car club, and her sister was married to a man whose name was Pike. So she called up one day and wanted to know if she could come over and talk to us. And I told Tommy, I said, now this is a put up deal. You know, I said, that we've got to find out what this is about. Well,
I wasn't president of the club.
And so anyway, she came over and
her sister.
We had quite a friendship for several years with these people. And her husband was
his name was Oral Pike.
No, Mary Smith's husband.
He was a cook at the Moran Hotel during the Depression. And the car she had was a 33 Plymouth. Bought it new in 33, and that woman, well, when you worked for Allis's, that woman owned 50 rent houses in Springfield.
Oh my goodness.
She was not poor by any stretch of the imagination. She had money, I mean, you know, and she was a good person.
Was she a single lady? She had all
So
these.
she'd been married, didn't have any kids, did she?
Uh-huh.
She had, and because we had Plymouth, you know, she kind of.
Got friendly with you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and.
They joined
and,
the car club, would come to
And
things.
then, and she'd bring her sister and her husband. He drove the car most
Yeah.
of the time.
Uh-huh.
And it was kind of funny because Tommy's dad's name was Orville and his name was
was
Oral.
So
So,
he worked for Evans Drugs there on the corner at Boonville and the Square.
Uh-huh.
And my dad last said one day they needed something, and he told him, said, well, I'll run it up there. Said, I'll take it, I'm going that way. And he took it up there and said he had Oral sign for it and said he just put Old Pike.
Uh-huh.
Said he went back to work. Said, one of the guys told him, said, you realize you're not allowed to sign. Was kidding him. He said, you can't sign that. He said, sign what? He said, well, you signed, you accepted delivery. And he said, you can't do that. He said, it's Old Pike. My dad said, oh, that was my cousin.
What year was it that they wanted to join the car club?
72, 73.
and she had a big house close to,
Well,
the.
right up here at St. Louis Street and Sherman, which is John Q. Hammond's Parkway now. They straightened it up when they come.
And they
No,
had-
they didn't. They cut it back around to the west, and it run catty corner to the east a little bit.
And they had an auction when she died, and she had beautiful stuff. She had Tiffany lamps and,
Oh my goodness.
oh, it was beautiful things she
Right.
had. And Tommy and I have been always glad that we got acquainted with her.
Mhm.
And
We went
Well, I've heard that neighborhood, just to the east of there, was sort of a black community.
Well,
That-
down
that's
behind the bakery that they just tore down,
Yeah.
there was.
On St. Louis?
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
And there was, who was it over here? Which professor was it that said, well, had a piece of paper one Sunday, did you know there's a black community over there? And yeah, there was a block in there. And, well, I was at the railroad and I asked one of the Bedells, I said, I thought everybody knew that was a black community. He said, yeah, I read that. Said, I wanted to call him up and say, well, where do you think them people that work for all them white people on Elm and Walnut live? He said, they lived down there. Now, he said, we didn't. He
Uh-huh.
said, we was the poor blacks. We lived over by Silver Springs Park.
Mm. So were there wealthier black people like this Miss Smith? Where
No.
would they live? Did they have their own community, or would they live in Simone's?
They all lived over there along Washington and in there, and then, Washington north of Commercial Street. There was a community in there, a group of them in there.
Uh-huh.
And, where did he work at the bakery? There was a black couple lived there, and they lived on the east side of Washington. And I was working at the railroad, and they built them a new house on the west side. I mean, a nice house. I mean, they just bought two of them old houses and tore them down.
Was
And-
excuse me, I want to ask you about the Frisco. Was that a pretty well integrated workplace? Was it a good
Yeah, there's
thing?
lots of black people there because, well, you had the,
A union?
porters.
Oh, uh-huh.
And, I mean, there
They
was
were
a
coming
lot
and
of
going.
train services that the blacks
Yeah, on the
Did.
Pullman cars.
on passenger
Early
service
on.
and everything.
Early on.
Right.
In fact, the dining car that was up here on Commercial there at the museum, I went over there probably 8 or 9 years ago now, and inspected that to see if it could be moved for the machinist union out of LaGrange, Illinois, which is next to Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
They were buying that car and sending it to the Pullman Museum
In Chicago.
in Chicago for the Porters Union. The Porters Union didn't have the money to buy it and send it, and the machinist, the guy in LaGrange, the main office, called me and said, "You're there, will you go, and you're retired, but will you go inspect that car?" And I said, "Well, I never inspected the car. I don't know anything about it. I worked on the locomotives." And he said, "Well, then it's the same difference. You just see if it's able to move." Well, I went over and spent 3 hours messing with it and looking and everything, and called him back. And I said, "What's this for?" And he said, "Well, we're going to pay for that car and the shipping to the Pullman Museum for the Porters Union, because they can't afford to do it." And that's one of the last original cars still in that we found.
Let's wind up our conversation talking about the Route 66 Association. Have you had African American members at all in the association in our state?
Irv Logan.
Oh yeah.
And
Well,
what
he's
was the
from
guy
Springfield.
that, yeah, he was Irv, and who was the, where'd he come from? St. Louis? The black guy that always come on the motor tours. He drove his, some model Pontiac or Cadillac or something, and he'd come every year for several years, older guy. And he'd come and go on our motor tours with us and everything. But we haven't had a lot particularly.
What about other ethnic groups like Mexican or Chinese or any Eastern European people been associated with the club?
Well, there was a guy from way back when that belonged to the club. His kids come over here to college. He worked for, what do you call it? They put out the Euro and everything.
Oh yeah, the European Union?
Yeah, he worked for it, and he come over here and he came to a few meetings and he belonged. He would, when he came to visit the kids, he would try to make that coincide with something he could go to in one or the other states or something. And I can't even call his name now. He's a nice guy.
There wouldn't be any problem if someone came.
Sure. What
Yeah.
about, one of the things that Route 66 is famous for is probably the Depression and people leaving the Ozarks and Oklahoma to go west. You ever have people whose relatives were part of that migration during the Depression, leaving the Dust Bowl?
Yeah. We've talked to people, and there's people that's in the association that had relatives that left here to go to California. Everybody thought that California is the land of milk and honey, and it wasn't bad, and so many of them got out there, they was starving to death out there because there wasn't anything to do.
Right. Yeah.
And a lot of them, as soon as they could, I guess, scrape together enough money, they came back.
Right.
Maybe not immediately. And, everybody left. Well, everybody, even when I got out of school, everybody talked about, I'm going to California, And my dad's oldest brother went out there and lived out there for most of his life.
What do you see for the future of the Route 66 Association? If you could see this road preserved and enhanced some way, how do you think the association can play a part in
Oh, gee, wished I
preserving history?
had an answer for that, because we're discussing that now with the Park Service and World Monument Fund. We went to Albuquerque in November. I hadn't been west in 5 years or so. And it was winter, things wasn't bloomed out, wasn't spring or summer. But going, I pulled off and went through some areas. Coming back, I drove it back. And
We had to hurry out there.
yeah,
and
but
so
to
there
be
was no
honest
time.
with you, there's places doesn't look that good. I mean, it looks pretty depressed. There's lots of, you go through communities and windows are boarded up, and it just, well, as I was telling Kaisa, I feel like that right now Route 66 is kind of fragile, really, and it needs something. The foreign tourist has been an asset for the past 5 years. I've met lots of people from Europe, Spain, everywhere, Japan, I mean, just all over. They come over here to that. I just talked to Jim Hinckley this morning. He got back from a tourism convention in Europe, and he was there 3 or 3.5 days, and he said they had a total of 200,000 people attend this convention for 3 days. That's a pretty good group, and it was put on by some, he named 2 or 3 tourism companies paid him to come over and talk, and he said that there was a lot of interest. Well, this bridge I was talking about at Gasconade, over the Gasconade River, a guy from Belgium emailed me and wanted to know if it was a fact it was closed. He'd read it was. I didn't hear that information from here in this country or even MoDOT. I got it from in Belgium on a Friday night. I couldn't we looked on the internet and saw that it was, but I couldn't confirm what the problem was till Monday morning. And so as I told the people at MoDOT, people in Europe watch us what happens on 66 more. They was as interested as the people that lived there by the river and had to use that bridge.
Mm-hmm.
They
Yeah,
was as
collected.
interested as the old boy that owned some acre, owned on both sides of it, and he couldn't get his tractor over to his other side.
Glenda, let me ask you one question. We're about to run out of time here. I just want to ask you what is it about Route 66 do you feel attracts women in any way that might be different than men? Is there something about Route 66 that attracts you and some of the women in the club?
I think it's just something a family can do together. And kids, the grandkids, they bring the grandkids. And I don't have any grandkids, but the ones that we're close with and everything, they just like to tell the story to the kids. They want the kids to be aware of the history behind it. And Route 66 started out to be kind of like this Dust Bowl thing because life was hard. But then by the time the 50s and 60s came, it was a good time. It was a way to a good time. It was a way for a vacation. It was a way to go to the river. It was a way to go to sightsee. It was a way to go to the petrified forest, and you know, it was a good time. It started out bad with bad deals, but then it evolved into something good. And I think that Tommy, I haven't so much as he has, but he goes to schools and gives programs to the kids, and it's part of their heritage. It's just, you've got to get the kids interested in it. You've got to get Route 66 in front of them, so when they get older, they will have a little bit of interest in it and continue continue with the
Appreciating.
feeling about it, and it's just a different era of life, because all these, so much has happened since it was decommissioned that hasn't been good as far as I'm concerned. We've been in several different wars and things like that, and we came out of the Depression to a good time while Route 66 was in its heyday, and it just was a goal for people to drive Route 66, and we have this Jim Hinckley that Tommy was talking about that went to this convention. He's an author and he lives in Arizona, and he's adamant about the road and the people and caring for the mom and pop businesses and the icons, the Jensen Points in Pacific, which is a beautiful place if you take the time to go to the top of it. That kind of thing, which gets just lost in the hustle and bustle of today.
Well, I think we've had a really good interview. David, you haven't.
One
Yeah,
question. If the Route 66 Association had all the money in the world, what would you want to do for Route 66? What is the ultimate vision that you guys have?
Well, I think there could be more money in preservation
The road.
and the road
itself.
and like saving this bridge. There's a lot of things that it could, if you had the money, that you could do. Like I say, I would like to see a national museum and such as that. But everything, well, like I tell everybody, it's under siege every day. Bridge, I didn't realize it. They tore that building down there they tore two now, on St. Louis Street, that Overland building there that was the Nash dealership. I happened to come through there and I didn't even know they'd tore it down. And I mean, every day there's something someplace hits the ground and it's gone. That's just the bottom line of it. And I hate to see that.
That movie Cars, the cartoon, is really wonderful in emphasizing how that era when Route 66 was built was basically a happy era, and that it was a human scale of people traveling and enjoying the road that is different than the interstate highway.
Well, people do things different now. Like you say, the interstate highway, you get in the car and you just take off and you drive 70 or 75 miles an hour. You get out once in a while and you get something to eat and you get gas and you go on, and you don't technically go through anything other than just country.
The kids watch TV in the vehicle.
Right.
They don't.
Yeah.
Well,
There's not much interaction with the little businesses or even the landscape.
well, they start out and you go 100 miles and I'm bored. Well, when I was a kid growing up, I guess you had to entertain yourself or something, but there was always something to look at or to see what was going by. And now, like you say, they watch television or sit there with them things in their ears. They don't hear anything other than what they want to. And I heard a guy talking about this. He said, well, he wondered if there'd ever be any more great inventions. And I thought, Well, I imagine there would be, but he said, we're not going to the moon anymore, we've done away with space, and he listed all everything we wasn't doing, and he said, and these young people's coming on, they don't dream or they don't think it's all in this thing in their hand, and they don't try to remember a lot of stuff because they think they'll always have the answer here. And I got to think, you know, that guy's right, and they won't even let you ride anymore. Now they think that's going away. Well, you know, like I've always said, necessity is the mother of invention. And if you don't need something, you're not going to invent it because you just coast along. And that's just kind of the way we've got anymore.
Well, you two are really unique in appreciating this particular era of American history and collecting and helping the association highlight what's really important about this highway.
I had an email a week or so ago from a person. I thought it was a lady, but I had another email yesterday from the college at Rolla, and she called this person a man, so I don't know whether it was a male or female, but this person is getting a display of Route 66 menus together for some show that they're having, and I think she was from Switzerland, and she was wanting us to send Route 66 menus. Well, that's not just something that you can pull out of a binder and send. I mean, you got to go to the flea market and hunt them, or
Go to Anton's, maybe he's got some.
Well, Anton's is not on 66.
That's true,
So,
but he's maybe gone along.
Yeah. I don't know what he
mark,
did with-
maybe you could
he
mark
had all-
over, put
he had all those
another
on the
number
wall.
on Glenstone if the address is on it, and they'll think it's north.
There's just a tremendous interest. This person had sent the college there at Rolla an email wanting menus from Zeno's. Well, I don't know what happened to those that were left.
Probably went in the dumpster.
When they tore
Well,
it down. And if I found one at the flea market, I'd have to pay for it, and I would want to keep it.
My want for a national museum, I forget who it was after the Park Service had me, said, well, why do you mentioned that a lot. I said, because I'm selfish. And said, selfish. And I said, yeah. I said, I've collected this stuff all these years. And I said, I'd like to see something done with it. And I said, not that I've got a world of money, but I said, I've spent a lot of money. I said, we've spent a lot of money on some of this stuff. And I said, I hate to see it laid out at an auction and a bunch of these people just go through it and tear up maps and stuff that I've collected. I said, I'd rather see it go somewhere where people that might appreciate it could look at it. Mm-hmm. And I said, I've even got a car or two I might donate. Mm-hmm. And I said, I just call it selfish. I said, I wouldn't even want to put my name on it. Especially, I'd just like to have a place to know it went. And he said, well, I don't know. I said, well, boy, I said, and I don't just have stuff from Missouri. I've got it for all 8 states. But I've got the bulk for Missouri.
He's got the heart of a real archivist, doesn't he?
Yeah.
When he was talking about the libraries and people knowing how to take care of stuff, I can think of 2 in particular that have a bunch of things, and yet they're being stolen and deteriorating because they don't know how to take care of them. And one's in Missouri, pretty close to us, and another one is in Texas. And it's really sad.
Well, and people don't realize a map,
Some of the old
people will,
maps.
the old maps, they will unfold them, and they can't fold them back like they belong to save your soul. I mean, some people just don't understand it, you know, when they go to taking it, opening it up and everything, and some of the best artwork in the world is on maps.
You're right.
And I love to look at maps. And even I have to lay them out and kind of think about it. Now, how did I really get this thing folded out like this? But you start, you know,
The
you do
association-
enough of it.
The association gave one of the museums some money to buy the map holder.
Yeah, them poles that the
Because
things will go
because
and
it
you
was
put them on.
so,
See it on
it
both
was such a bad
sides.
thing that,
Uh-huh.
that they were doing, letting people
Yeah,
just
they,
Oh,
come
well,
in.
me and Mark went in and wanted to see this collection. And they said, oh, yeah, you can look in there. And we went back there. It wasn't that much. And I'd heard there was trailer truckloads of the stuff this guy had to give it to Jim Powell. And they just throwed a bunch of them out on the table and let people just go through them. And I thought, oh my gosh, I can't believe that.
The association has a preservation fund, and it's just a nominal, it's just a recognition thing more than money.
Drop in the bucket.
But each year, we give 3 or 4 different
awards.
awards. We like to give it to business members of the association that have done something to preserve their business or whatever it is they're pushing.
Needs to be a finished project, but
And-
pretty well done, so you know, I mean, there's a lot of people come to you and say, now, if I get the money, I'm gonna do this. Well, you could give them the money, but they're never gonna get this done, is what it amounts. In fact, at Edmond, Oklahoma, the Park Service, we had a meeting down there. We went over there, this place, and the old boy was fixing this old motel, and it was rock, and it was a neat place, but they hadn't got hadn't anybody with any engineering aptitude come around and looked at it. And he was gonna fix the floor and everything. He got started, and they had put the wood frame up, put the rock on it. Well, he took the wood frame out of the floor and the walls, and we went over on a bus, didn't we? And he had that there, and he said, now I've got to go back and build this and hook this wall on here and everything. And Michael Taylor was over then, and Kaiser. And asked him, I said, did that guy ever get that done? He said, oh, I think he got 2 grants from him. And the first one he did what he said he was going to do, but he was taking the inside out and the back wall fell down. And when we was there, part of the back wall had fell out, but he was going to reframe inside. Michael said, oh, windstorm come by and blew the other 3 walls down on it. And I said, where did the grant money go? He said, the guy just give up and sold it. We come back up through there, coming home before Thanksgiving. And I think somebody else has built something there. I couldn't see what looked like the area exactly. And he said, well, when you take money and you can't fulfill the project, it goes back into the black hole of the government. And I said, the what? And he said, yeah, that money goes back. I said, they don't put it back in, and he said, nope, it goes in the black hole of the government. And I said, huh? I said, and then I guess the congressman get to split that at the end of the year. And he laughed. He said, I can't say, but he said, it just goes in the black hole. He said, that's what it is.
The association also has a neon preservation committee, and right now we've finished 5 projects helping businesses with their grant papers and
to get money.
and to get mostly from the National Park Service grant program like this one, and to restore their neon. And I think that's a great need too. Neon's in that good time era
Right.
that I was talking about, you know, and there's a possibility that one of the counties in Missouri is gonna have a neon park now.
Wow.
So we'll have to see how that pans out.
I've tried to sell that to 2 or 3 places,
There's a,
and nobody wants it.
I'm afraid,
afraid it's
I hope they have really
High
thought,
maintenance because people will vandalize it.
Really?
I hope they
And
really
I
thought it
believe
out.
that's
Because
the
it's gonna have to
likelihood.
have, it's gonna have 24-hour security constantly.
Well, there's, some of these rest stops just east of Springfield have done a nice job with some period buildings. They don't use neon, but
Well, they're just replicas.
Well, that
Replicas,
one, yeah,
right.
up there on 44 Conway, yeah.
Yeah.
They, you know, a little story about that. The guy from MoDOT told me, he said, you know, they've got 4 or 5 of them over the state.
Mhm.
And he said, Route 66, he said, we thought everybody up and down the road on 44 would want that. I said, well, now personally, I said, don't take this personal, but I said, you put it in the wrong place. And he said, at Conway, I said, yeah, coming from the east, you're more than halfway across the street, or across the state. And I said, going east, you're way over in the state before you come to that. He said, our pick was Joplin. And they didn't want it. They told us, no, don't put it here. We don't want it. And I said, you have to be joking. And he said, no, we was shocked. We was going to put it where we already had rest stops. And he said, so we come to Conway. And I said, well, you know, I said, I couldn't understand nobody not. I said, where I really think you should have put it is on 66. He said, well, yeah, but he said, not that. We was wanting to try to draw people off the interstate. I said, good idea, but I said, you know, I was shocked. I would have picked putting it down there or up towards St. Louis way, but he said,